I read about how the pet cemetery is going under and that all the pets are going to be exhumed. My first cameraman told me I didn't know how to shoot this kind of thing, and he did. At one point, I pushed him into a partially exhumed dog grave.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Let's Take 5, the podcast where we take a cinema legend and take 5 of their films to highlight their excellence and range. My name is Austin Luger.
My name is Eric Martindale.
And we are on part 3 of our Errol Morris 5. Our previous episodes were Gates of Heaven and The Thin Blue Line. Upcoming we have The Fog of War and Tabloid. But today we are covering A Brief History of Time. This is his biopic. I don't know if that fully applies to documentaries, but it's definitely his biopic of the acclaimed genius Stephen Hawking. And a look at him at a young age and kind of how he grew up in school, had the disease ALS, and continued to be a genius scientist who inspired people while also a difficult home life.
Yeah, you have that. You also have science as well.
Yes.
So it's equal parts kind of both the Stephen Hawking life and Stephen Hawking's theories that he has and other stuff, which it's that stuff's always like difficult for me now looking back on, because science is obviously an evolving thing, and not only does the science change, but also the theories of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So, like for instance, I'm hearing Stephen Hawking on here talking about how he believes in this sort of big crunch thing that's going to happen, and I know for a fact at the end of his life he didn't. He believed in the big chill, which is essentially the exact opposite of that.
Well, I haven't heard about the big chill aside from the film. What is
so the big crunch is where basically everything comes back together, the
right.
universe blows back open again, and basically it's just an ever-going cycle.
Mm-hmm.
If the universe is expanding, eventually the universe has an end, and it will do the opposite of expanding. It will condense.
Mm-hmm.
The big chill is that the universe just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding till eventually all the planets and stars are so far apart that there are no new planets and stars, and eventually everything gets really cold and all the lights turn off. So that's what he said would happen.
Okay.
So it's kind of an interesting theory, because we're always moving away from each other. So theoretically, if there was a culture or a society, let's say on Earth, which
mm-hmm.
isn't going to be here, but just bear with me, is on Earth 10 billion years from now, and they look up the sky, they're going to think the universe is much smaller than it actually is, because it's only what they're going to be able to see. The universe will have expanded so far to that point that all the galaxies will be out of view. So they'll say, wow, the universe is only 25 galaxies
mm-hmm.
large, when we, of course, know that it's billions and billions. So that was a very long explanation, but that's what it will eventually happen.
No, but it kind of is kind of how I felt during the movie. Because when I first watched this a handful of years ago, because I tried to read the book, Brief History of Time, because I'm always fascinated by time as the concept. And I was so overwhelmed so early into that book. It's an acclaimed book for a reason. It's remarkably short, but it is still something that went over my non-scientific
It feels
head.
like a textbook, though.
Yes, absolutely. So I watched it like Errol Morris. Errol Morris is the guy who's going to be able to explain this book to me. And then found out it's more about Hawking himself.
Mm-hmm.
And the science, while still brilliant and visualized in a very Errol Morris way, is still kind of looking at it as a metaphor for Hawking's life.
It looks at it as a metaphor for Hawking's life, and it also, when it does give you the scientific beats, it does it in the big concepts that humans are. Typically, humans, if you aren't interested in science, you are at some, even though I believe on a deep enough level, everyone's interested in science, but
mm-hmm.
you do like those big things, like black holes. Like, that's something we all can talk about and know. So it focuses on what I like to call, like, Carl Sagan science, and I love Carl Sagan, he's my favorite person maybe ever. But Carl Sagan was so famous because he was able to, he's like Jack Hanna for animals. I mean, he made science relatable to humans. The sections in this movie still have that. Like, most people that have at a moderate competency level can follow along with the science that's in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And they may miss the metaphor for Stephen Hawking's life. But I think that's why those pieces were chosen.
And it's kind of great because you get the Carl Sagan, to get the Bill Nye,
mm-hmm.
and depending on if he's being a curmudgeon this day, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah. He's a Tyson fan, even though he's literally the heir. He's the heir of Carl Sagan.
Yeah, he did the new Cosmos.
And Sagan basically handpicked him as that heir.
And he's very good in Cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't ask him about a recent film.
Mm-hmm. It's like that's how he stays Twitter relevant.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Yeah.
Weird dude.
Yeah, very weird dude.
But what I really enjoyed about this film is that it doesn't have a sort of gatekeepery elements to science. Like Hawking, one of the greatest minds of our time, he still was introduced by the things that really excited him through cheesy science fiction. Mm-hmm. And we see that element of, like, there's no real wrong way to approach these things. And I really enjoy Hawking from that element. And yeah, he was, because I think maybe because it was always so difficult for him to, like, speak and kind of almost inspiring the Carl Sagan, I really still enjoy how open and public he was for so many things. Like, I mean, he was a writer on The Big Bang Theory. Like, this guy has this effect on people, not just because he's a great genius, but because he has a very unique kind of charisma.
Yeah.
This comes across in the film.
And that unique charisma is part and parcel probably to the fact of his disability, too, that he's people see him as an inspiring figure because he's able to seemingly do so much, or was seemingly able to do so much with such an unbelievable disability, but also still able to maintain his humanity through it all. I mean, it's really weird. Like, when Stephen Hawking is speaking, I talk about him speaking. Even though it's obviously a modulated voice that's coming through. That's not Stephen Hawking's real voice, yet in my head, that's what he sounds like, right? And I forget about the computer, and I forget about the disability, and I just see the humanity shine through. This is to a lesser extent than that, but, like, one of the things I've talked to you about before is I think Peter Dinklage is such an amazing actor that I forget. I forget that he's a little person while I'm watching the thing. I don't think about that stuff. And some people are so good at what they do that they let you see past that to the point where it's like, I want to see Peter Dinklage play Hamlet.
Sure.
I want to see that. You know what I mean?
And a lot of that is also just through, level of exposure, right?
Though that's probably it too.
And there's something about, like, Hawking again being so public and really also embracing that machine. Like, I love when they first show you, like, when it's first, like, in the narrative of him going to be using this computer to speak, the screen moved so quickly as he went through words. So it's like, you almost have to be a Hawking-like person to know how to use this at the speed he does. And that's so impressive. And the way they look at his disease is such a tragic and fascinating element of his life. Because, he got this, his hand started to not work, his memory started to go, and, like, they recognized this. And he was told he has 2.5 years to live. And this film was made in the 90s, mid-90s. At the point, he'd been alive for many years and ended up living for another 15 years, basically, from this. And he was able to do so much. And there's such a strange thing that the film kind of brings up about, like, whether this disease was ultimately the best thing for him.
Right. I know, it's a weird... Yeah. That's when you get in this weird sort of dilemma. I mean, his mom certainly thinks that he wouldn't have been famous. That he wouldn't have applied himself as he did. Because he doesn't have, and by Stephen Hawking's own admission, he doesn't have anything else to do. Yeah. But sit and think, which is his favorite thing to do.
It's true. And it's great because they bring the idea of, like, he was fascinated and inspired by everything. And he went towards the things, the theoretical sciences, because that just involves sitting and thinking. You don't have to, like, hold up rock samples and, like, look at it this way. This is, like, it's him in his mind palace, to quote Hannibal.
Yeah, no, and it is, like, it almost in a weird way seems like we were endowed by Stephen Hawking by some creator who was able to make him be... He's disabled, right? But it's so rare that he's able to get disabled and then live for another 40 years with this disability that the only thing he can do is sit and think. Right. Now, Stephen Hawking tell me that's all bullshit, but it is kind of weird how, like, that happened, right? That we were basically given his mind for that period of time, and that's it, because he couldn't give anything else.
As he defied science and stayed alive.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, exactly, right? So it just seems so, it's just so unbelievable. and really, really quite amazing.
Well, I want to talk about Errol Morris's approach to this subject, because at this point now we've seen him. This is kind of at least tonally in between the two films we saw. Gates of Heaven is more on the quirkier side of Errol Morris's tastes, and Thin Blue Line is incredibly somber.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of very much the curious lens of Errol Morris, and I hate to compare films to other films, but there was an Oscar-winning biopic a few years ago called The Theory of Everything. Do you see it?
I did, and I wasn't. I don't.
I hate the movie.
Okay, you just took it. I saw it with Meg,
mm-hmm.
who really enjoyed the performances in the film.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was really boring and dumb.
And that's like it. It was going for a copy of a copy of a copy of Beautiful Mind kind of thing, where it's so cheesy. He's a smiling genius at all times.
It seemed really lacking in truth.
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny how there are things in both movies. Like, for example, when he's at university and they're given like the 10 most impossible problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you get like one part of one, you're going to pass this class. And he kind of comes back with them all done. Or at least half of them done. I can't remember.
Very, very type of movie.
Yeah. And
stuff.
in the Theory of Everything, he does that and then like smirks. And it's like inspired music while they're all like aghast. Like, oh my God. Whereas in Errol Morris film, the guy who tells that is on a couch, not even a very lit scene, and he's like annoyed, like, of course Steve did this.
Yeah.
And that to me makes a real like genius seem human, whereas this was just cheesy Superman in Theory.
Yeah, I guess that's what it is. I mean, I don't really remember a lot of it. I didn't really like many films that year. So, and I do recall, I mean, what was that, 2014?
Yeah, 13 or 14.
So that was Birdman year.
Yeah. What a year.
To rest my case.
Yeah.
Theory of Everything may have been better than Birdman.
same year also as The Imitation Game, if we're also going to go with British Geniuses.
I forgot about that. I did not see that. At first when you were saying it, I was hoping you would, I was like, oh shit, I don't remember whether the movie's called The Imitation Game or The Theory of Everything.
Yeah, they were very similar.
Yeah. But of course it's The Theory of Everything. But, yeah, it's not a very good movie. This film, also, too, it's interesting how it uses its subjects, because it uses the scientist people for the stuff related to the science in the film, and then it will bounce to the home life people who are the people that Stephen Hawking was living with, or who knew him before the disease and whatnot. Odd that the missus was never interviewed.
Right.
Thought that was a weird omission from the film.
We'll talk about this, because people don't know this
personal
about
life.
Stephen Hawking.
Yeah. So from what I gather is that he was with his first wife for a very long time. They got a divorce like in the early 2000s or something like that. He ended up marrying a nurse that was taking care of him, who may have been physically abusing him, but there was no charges ever filed. Stephen never would. Eventually, Stephen divorced her and went back with the woman who he was married to. I forget her name. That's why I'm not saying it. And then they were cohabitating, I think, at the end, and he reconnected with his family. But there was a dark period where he wasn't really part of his family anymore.
Right. And that is something...
And that's after this movie.
Yeah.
So we don't see that in the film.
And there's such a strange element of, like, seeing him as a person, seeing him as a genius, and seeing also him as someone who needs to be taken care of.
Right.
Because he can't function on his own.
Mm-hmm.
And that really kind of made me just kind of keep admiring him more. Because to just look at the genius aspect, just look at the textbook.
Mm-hmm.
And to see him here, also with a sense of humor and a sense of curiosity and excitement about the subjects. Like, he's not a vain, power-hungry, like, I need all the medals kind of thing.
No,
although
not at all.
He keeps getting the medals.
He does keep getting the medals. He also never comes off as discouraging towards theories that he might not agree with,
right,
or philosophies that he may not agree with either.
Talk about that religious scene. The guy who would come with the Bible. and such.
Remember you go ahead. You saw it more recently.
It was just a curious thing because Stephen Hawking's not a religious man. Kind of fits into that scientist kind of cliche, but he had this friend who would just kind of come and talk to him about like theological like debates and elements, and it was something that it wasn't that like Hawking like tolerated it, like I got nothing else to do today. He kind of really embraced that again as a different perspective to it all, and especially as you're looking for unifying theories, it's good to kind of hear all the theories. And yeah, the way they use science in this movie is a very kind of Errol Morris thing. And it used kind of the reconstruction elements he used in Thin Blue Line to really curious metaphor elements here.
It's more produced in this film.
Yes, absolutely.
But yes, you're right.
And like the one that they keep using over and over again is the smashing of the cup, right? It's that the cup falls, and you kind of keep watching it in slow motion, and you're only seeing the cup fall. You don't see the cup being put back together again, because we're looking at time only from one limited point of view.
Yeah, and then Hawking went on to that whole thing about if we are in the big crunch and we do come back, would time run backwards?
Right. Would the cup complete itself again?
Would it complete itself again? And
it definitely was in Hannibal season 3, I believe.
Was it?
Yeah.
That is really funny. Now we really come full circle.
Yeah.
But it is this really sort of haunting scene where it's like he ends up proving why that can't be the case, but also like thinking about concepts that are way beyond our human understanding. I mean, start to wade in that area, it gets a little terrifying. Like, do I want to live in that world where the coffee cup puts itself back together?
And that was always the thing that whenever I would hear Hawking talk about that kind of the big crunch, I just couldn't understand if we would even have the perspective of understanding what's happening, of having kind of time reverse and kind of crunching like that.
Will we even know? Will we even recognize?
And those kind of like...
Because theoretically we would be back too.
Right. And that is such a strange thing. And that's when looking at time is such a strange element. Like, very casually he says early on, like, it's weird how I remember the past but don't remember the future. And that is something where like you would go, well, no, it hasn't happened yet. But it's looking at time as a whole, in which happen to be standing in the middle of it at the moment.
Right. So time as it works, and this is basically what I gathered from the film, is that the way time is working is almost as a human construct as people that live in like the third dimension that we all live in, which is where we're on a plane that's moving forward, but time isn't actually really like that. Time is the entire line. Right.
Time is like a sea. It's an ocean. We are traveling through it. It is a constant.
Exactly. So it's where you say, oh, duh, about something like that. Well, why can't I remember the future? But there is kind of something to that.
Right.
I mean,
in black holes, which is kind of the big thing that I always associate Stephen Hawking with, is such a strange thing because that is time distorted in a crazy perception, right? Like they talk about how like if you throw something into it, you don't just see it go down the drain. You see it exist.
You see it exist right on the line,
right?
Even after it falls into the drain.
Yes.
So if I were to approach a black hole and I'm at the event horizon, which is the point of no return, and I step through it, I'm going through it. I'm committed now. I can't come back. I'm going to the center of the black hole. But what you'll see is me frozen in time forever. You will see me on the edge, which is just like insane. Yeah. I'm long gone. But the way you're perceiving time outside of that is I'm frozen in space.
And I believe if you change perspective so way, if I understand this correctly, you not only see you at the event horizon, you can also see like further down the line.
Yeah, you
will be existing at all points.
All the way down into the center of the black hole, which is the size of the head of a pin.
Yeah.
And yet it's creating this huge wealth of gravity and chaos.
And something I kind of kept going through of looking at time from backwards and forwards and all sorts, and the film doesn't overdo this to the point where it's cheesy, but I just couldn't help but think about Hawking and his disease, right? Like, we have such a very clear before and after, and you can never go back. Like, he's never going to be cured of this disease.
He's literally frozen.
Right. And I found that, it never gets cheesy, but I just couldn't help but think that in the back of my mind of, like, you talk about all these hypotheticals, but, like, one day maybe the couple will go back together and whatnot.
Walk and stand.
But he's not someone who then started to dive into disease research.
No.
He's not looking to kind of cure something that is at this moment still very uncurable.
Mm-hmm.
I found it to be a very fascinating thing. He's not someone who is nostalgic. He just has to be dealing with science that is inherently nostalgic.
Well, that's kind of what's so attractive about him, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the big thing being, he has a beautiful mind.
Mm-hmm.
So he's better than a lot of us. He can
definitely
think,
us.
Yes, he's intellectually an intellectual juggernaut. So you have that, but also you have, and I'm not saying listen, the amount of self-pity I would feel if I were in a situation like that would be unbelievable.
Yeah,
and I'm sure Hawking probably went through something like that. But to be honest, it doesn't appear that way. There is no self-pity, which would be certainly understandable, but also is kind of endearing about him.
There was something early on when they talked about him first getting the disease, and his hand was working, he kind of lost some memory, and the way that he wanted to kind of test to see if his brain was still working was he took the Mensa test. And he talked to one of his colleagues and friends at the time, we all just be honored to get into Mensa, and Hawking just did it as a litmus test for himself. Which I think is delightful.
Yeah, I mean, and he was the man. I mean, it's weird. It's interesting that he had just died. I mean, that was
in our time.
In our time, yeah. So it's because it's one of those things where, nowadays, there's very few things people agree on, and when they disagree, even in the slightest bit about anything, everyone's ready to come to blows this day and age. But that was the one thing that we could all agree mutually sucked. No one's happy Stephen Hawking's dead.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's one thing everyone could get behind. It's wow, that we lost a great mind today.
And it's funny just how much we all just we just admired his genius across the board. And I remember a few years before he died, someone kind of asked him the question that so many scientists get, are there aliens out there? And he was kind of just a very simple look at the infinite and go, yeah, I mean, there has to be, right? And then he went a step further, more as scientists don't, because, and we shouldn't go after them because they'll kill us.
yeah. That's a bad thing. Yeah, I remember that. It reminds me of the Arthur C. Clarke quote, which is, there are two possibilities that exist. Either we're alone in the universe or we're not. Both are equally terrifying.
Yeah.
I really like that.
It's good.
That immensity of it, and the weight of that. It's awesome stuff.
Especially since both of those kind of play into 2001.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
It is the loneliness and the everything.
Yeah, and just because we're on the topic of Arthur C. Clarke, because I brought up the topic of Arthur C. Clarke and Arthur C. Clarke quotes, I always like the one which is, I don't believe in astrology. I'm a Sagittarius, and we're skeptical. I just really like that.
Cute.
Oh, he's funny. But, yeah, I mean, it's a great movie, great documentary. I definitely recommend it. Errol Morris is we're continuing along this 5. He's certainly riding the wave, and the wave is maybe beginning to crest with next week. We'll talk about that, but this is a great movie.
Absolutely, and I'm really enjoyed that we rewatched it. We'd love you to come back next week, because we're going to discuss his Oscar-winning film, The Fog of War. Until then, you can go to artandmore.com, leave a comment on this or any other episode of the show. While you're there, you check out some other podcasts, including The Immortals, where myself and 3 others review the 1001 movies, albums, food, songs, and TV shows you must consume before you die. This week, we took a week off for Memorial Day, but we'll be back next week with a fun set. Also, Ad Absurdum should be having more episodes this summer, where 2 lawyers discuss the real-life implications of pop culture. And where else can we find you?
Constant Aversions, my YouTube channel. You can check me out on there.
And I know this is the subplot that everyone's really following on the podcast now. I have now completed Chrono Trigger.
Oh,
which is going to be your next subject of review.
It's coming.
So
it's almost done, actually.
But I kept teasing it for the past few episodes, I have now finished it.
And you can now watch it.
I can.
I think when we started that video, you hadn't even started it.
It's true.
You're still several months away from starting it.
Which means I now look forward to you all reviewing the very first God of War on the PS3. I just don't know what your next review is since I'm playing it next.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, also leave us a review on iTunes, follow us on Twitter, the whole thing. Thank you all for listening. I'm Austin Luger.
I'm Eric Martindale.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the universe have a beginning, and if so, what happened before then? Where did the universe come from, and where is it going?